put salt. I will send them.
Yep. Did you turn the recording on? Is that what you did?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. All right. All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. What do we have? We have about 20 people on, probably some more people jumping on while we get started. So these virtual classes that we do the second Tuesday of every month, running from 11 o'clock till 1 o'clock, usually about 2 hours. And it usually is to try to focus in on one of the more important documents, or maybe multiple documents, depending on the size of the document itself. I think last time we did it, we used 3 or 4 different addenda that we looked at. But today, I think we'll probably use up the majority of the time on the 2 that we're going to look at, which of course is the buyer representation agreement and tenant representation agreement too. And then the amendment, which of course will change the terms of the original agreement that we created. One of the things about any contract form that we work with, whether it be listing agreement, buyer representation agreement, sales contract, whatever it is, if you need to change it once you've created it, you don't go back to the same document and make changes to it. That's not the way that it's set up. It's not set up to where if I need to go and change something later on, like let's say that my buyer representation agreement is good through July 15th, and we've decided that we need to extend it. We don't go back to the original document and scratch out July 15th and put August 31st, whatever, and then get initials. That's not the way we do it. There is a document form in each one of those contract forms, listing agreement, buyer or tenant rep, sales contract, called an amendment, which of course is what an amendment is. It makes changes to an existing contract. So we don't ever like the idea of going back to the original document, scratching stuff out, adding new stuff in, and getting it initialed or not getting it initialed and going that route. Because first of all, there's not a lot of room, not a lot of blank space in these documents. And so if you get to the point where you're starting to scratch stuff out and you add new stuff in, and then you go and you get it initialed and you do that 2 or 3 times, it gets so messy, you can't really tell exactly what you had to begin with. So we'll use the amendment form when we need to, and we'll take a look at the amendment form. So a couple of things before we get started, just a couple of, I don't know if it'd be misconceptions, but just a couple of things that I want to make sure that everybody knows and understands and remembers back to the NAR settlement, because the NAR settlement had a huge effect on the use of this document and maybe our listing agreement too, but probably more this document than any other document out there, because of the NAR settlement, it became a requirement, an absolute positive requirement, that this form be filled out before we do anything that requires a real estate license. They use the threshold of showing property, but actually representational tasks, if you will, can actually occur before that. But they use that threshold because it's something that we can all adhere to. This document has to be filled out before we go out and show property. And we're seeing a lot of issues in compliance where that's just not happening. And that's a violation. And I guarantee you that these lawsuits are not over. That was round 1. Last time was round 1. They're going to come back 2, 3, 4 years from now, and they're going to say, well, now we're finding out that even though NAR created this rule that they were supposed to be getting written documents before they went out and showed property, they're not doing it. And so what are they going to do? They're going to audit files. They're going to start pulling files from every company, make them start showing evidence, make them start showing documentation. And if they see that it's not being done properly, then it's all going to start all over again. And so, I'm not trying to scare anybody or anything else. And that's my prediction. I'm hoping that I'm out of it by the time that comes back around and happens again. But to me, it's going to happen again. This was not the end of it. It was the beginning of it. So anyway, this form has to be done not should be done, might be done, has to be done before we go out and show property. And I know that's not easy. The way I describe it is we are asking a buyer to marry us before we've even dated, because the timing of this thing says that before we go out and start looking at property, I need you to commit to me. And so that's like saying, well, you haven't shown me anything yet. You haven't shown me a house. You haven't proven to me that you're capable of doing what I need you to do. So why in the world would I commit to you? So as we go through, we'll talk about maybe how we can do that to try to make that buyer or that tenant feel more comfortable. And honestly, it's really buyers we're talking about. Tenants are easier to work with. It's like, and it's a shorter term type of transaction. They're willing to pretty much do whatever we need them to do. It's the buyers where we have a little bit of problem. So that's the first thing. The reminder that it is a absolute positive requirement that we have this thing filled out before we go out and show property. And timestamps give you away. You can backdate this document as far back as you want, but that does not mean that this document took effect on that day. This document took effect on the day that the last signature or last initial was placed on the document, and timestamps show when that is. We've had representation agreements show up here that were backdated 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, but seeing when it was signed and when it was initial just kind of gave it away. Marty, do you want to throw in there?
Yeah, just one thing. And one thing that blows me away as a broker, and one thing that it's easy to do, but you get a buyer-tenant reps agreement signed by your buyer. You upload the file, you are good to go, and you forget to sign it yourself.
Yeah.
You're signing on behalf of the broker. We see so many of these not signed by the agent. And so you don't have a valid contract. So you haven't done your job, when you did by not signing it. But there's a place there for you to sign. You sign on behalf of the broker in the agreements. Just make sure you're doing your own paperwork too. Yep.
It's easy. It's easy to do. And in fact, sometimes, especially if this is being done in person, or especially, even if you're sending it by electronic signature, I don't see a problem with us signing it first. If we sign it first, then that's kind of us committing to them, just like we're expecting them to commit to us. Almost every document, if it's something that I'm having to sign with a seller or with a buyer, I've always signed it first. I've signed it as it's kind of like show of good faith. To me, it's always been like, here, I'm showing you that I'm committing to this now. So anyway. All right. So one other thing. The 1507 versus the 1501. Here at HomeSmart, we do not use the 1507, and there's various reasons for that. The whole reason the 1507 was created, and I think we're going to see this play out here in a few weeks when they have another document they may be introducing. The whole idea, my understanding, and this of course was towards the end of last year, the whole idea behind the 1507 versus the 1501 was that the 1507 was originally put out there as kind of a transition step to get people comfortable getting buyers to sign documents before they just said, here's the 1501. This is my understanding. I don't know if it's correct or not, but my understanding was 1507 was never going to be a permanent document, that it was originally created just to get us in the habit of getting the buyer to sign something before we got started. It was never supposed to take the place of a 1501. It really was supposed to be there maybe to get started and then get it transferred to the 1501. And then somewhere along the way, that 1507 was supposed to be removed completely, because by that time, their hope was that we had gotten to the point as agents that we felt comfortable moving forward and asking them to sign this. Is that, Marty, do you have anything?
That's my understanding as well. And I think it's they tried to do too much with it as well, allowing a showing service and of course, or a full service, which was not defined in the form. Left out the procuring cause and left out the hold harmless when it comes to people getting injured. So it's a form that has to go away, similar to the 2406 that went away once they updated the TREC form on the buyer side for compensation. The new form they're coming out with really is a showing form. It's like a dating form for a couple weeks. We'll see the details when it comes out and train on it. But instead of having the 1507 be confusing, we'll have the 1501 always. And the new form will allow that transition period for a showing service, if you will. Prior, and you and I have talked about this. Hopefully, it has something around agency or what we can and can't do. So we'll see.
Yeah, whether or not we'll allow that new form kind of depends on what's there and once you've had a chance to look at it and decide. And maybe they would have been better off. Maybe they were in such a hurry to try to get this thing done last year that maybe they just didn't think about it. But that's probably really what that 1507 should have been. The 1507 probably never should have been full service offering at all. It should have been, because you do have those companies out there that offer showing services like Show On Me and all of those that are out there where that's all they do is they just show property. And I think maybe they were trying to, like you said, I think maybe they were trying to do too much too quick with this one form. So anyway.
Yep.
All right. So let's take a look. Let's see what we've got here. And so obviously, of course, we know that our first section has to do with parties. Our parties in the buyer or tenant representation agreement is either the buyer or the tenant. That's going to be the client. If you have more than one, then you put their information in there. That's the other thing that we don't see a lot of sometimes, is that they put names but no contact information at all. You really need to go ahead and fill in as much of that as you can, at least some kind of contact information. And of course, under broker, sometimes we see people put Marty's name in there. That really needs to be HomeSmart. And for the life of me, I do not understand why they don't just say brokerage, but they say broker. And so some people take that literally, that we want the person's name in there. It really needs to say HomeSmart. Needs to say the broker's name is HomeSmart. And then, of course, address and city, state, and zip, phone number, email, all the contact information. Sometimes we see the agent put their own phone number and their own email there. That's, I think, okay. But it could be the office as well. So just make sure that you put HomeSmart there. And that's usually where we see some issue with it, is that they put Marty's name there or they put their own name there. But it should say HomeSmart. So should be HomeSmart. Second section, nothing to fill out. It really just says that we now are their exclusive agent, which means that they will not go and sign another buyer representation agreement where the market areas would overlap. Now, they could have multiple buyer representation agreements going at once, as long as the market areas and the times do not overlap. So if they had it going at the same time, times wouldn't overlap. But if they had a buyer representation agreement with an agent in Montgomery County and had another one with a different agent in Harris County, they could do that because the market areas don't overlap. So they could do that. It's not a good idea. I wouldn't want it as the agent, but it is possible. All right, then we get to section 3. Acquire means to either purchase or lease, again, because this is a buyer/tenant representation agreement. Closing in a sale means that date that legal title gets conveyed to a purchaser. C is market area, and we're going to spend a couple of minutes on this one. Number one, this is the first way that you can limit this document to try to make a buyer feel comfortable moving forward with signing it before we go out and show property. I can limit this document by geographic area, or I can limit this document by time. And we'll talk about time when we get into section 4. But market area can be anything from one street address to the entire state of Texas. But then we've also got to be real here. You and I will never be doing a transaction anywhere in the state of Texas. So look at what their definition of market area is. And the Real Estate Commission will tell you that when it comes to market area, and the Texas Association of Realtors too, will say that this needs to be clearly defined, which means we have to know without a doubt, and anybody who looks at this document will have to know without a doubt whether you are there or not. So it says that area of Texas specified as follows. And then it says, for example, insert property address, subdivision, city, county, zip code, etc. So way that you can potentially get a buyer to feel comfortable to signing this thing. We've got 3 houses we want to go and look at today. All right, buyer, here's what I need from you. In order for me to act as your agent today, you and I are going to go out and we're going to look at 3 properties. And in order for me to be able to offer you advice and opinion and to act as your agent at these 3 properties, I need you to hire me. And I need you to hire me for these 3 properties. I understand that it will only be for these 3 properties. But while we're out there looking at them, as your agent, I'll be able to answer any question I can answer for you. I'll be able to give you advice and opinion. I'll be able to do anything that an agent can do. If you don't agree to that, then I can't do that. In other words, all I can do is open a door and that's it. I won't be able to do anything else. So we can limit it that way. Maybe they'll feel comfortable with that. Maybe they'll feel comfortable. Okay, I get it. I understand, but it's only for these properties. You show me these 3 properties. I don't think you did a good job. I don't want any of these 3 houses. I can leave you high and dry and I can go with another agent. And yes, that means that you and I are taking that risk, but it's a risk that we need to take. If you have enough confidence in your ability, then you should feel that this really gives me an opportunity to prove myself. This gives me the chance to show you what I'm capable of doing. Marty, you got something?
Just a couple of things on the agency. It's always interesting on these things because as realtors, we have to be very careful about soliciting of someone else's business, right? But that's why you want to see a copy of their buyer tenant rep as well. Because if it is limited to an area, let's say it's in Baytown and you work in Montgomery, right? You can say, well, I'm not selling you a property in Baytown, but I can show you properties in Montgomery with our own agreement that's listed in Montgomery. So it's something to think about when you're talking to buyers. And of course, you can limit this by timeline as well. I'm going to sign one for a day. I'm going to sign one for a week, whatever. And not that you would do that, but the point is you want to, what's your risk? And to Don's point, if you say, I'm going to do 3 properties in Baytown, you show those 3 properties, they like them, but they're not quite sure. And they go back to the builder and see a 4th property that's not on your list. They don't, you don't have procuring costs. So there's a risk involved that you're willing to make. Let them know that you let them know I'm taking a risk and it's mutually there so that we can further our relationship, if you will. Prove myself. Yeah.
Take a blank 1505 with you. That way, if there's another property that all of a sudden they want to see and it's not on the list, you can amend it right there and there, right then and there. So it does need to be clearly defined. I like to use counties. You can use whatever you want, but what I like about counties is that is a very definitive geographic area. Your property cannot be in more than one county at a time. It's either going to be in one county or it's going to be in whatever county. And I've always encouraged any agent that I work with to use Harris and the adjacent counties. And I like that because that's Harris County and any county that touches Harris County. And there are 7 others. For me, that's a large enough area. I don't ever plan on going outside of that area. If it works, fine. If it doesn't work, then you can use whatever you want, but it does have to be clearly defined. And it also has to be an area where you would go to try to sell property. We get buyer representation agreements that where the agent has put in state of Texas. That's not right. There's no way. You're going to drive to Fort Stockton and go show a $145,000 house. No, you're not. And so it really has to be clearly defined, but it also has to be an area where you would truly work, where you would truly represent that individual. Because here's the thing, competency, and the real estate commission is cracking down on agents who are doing transactions where they are not competent. There's geographic competency and there's transactional competency. But the real estate commission has really started to crack down on that because they know that since the number of transactions have diminished over the last couple of years, that there is a lot of tendency for an agent to try to make up for lost commissions by maybe pushing that envelope just a little bit further than they really should, taking on a type of transaction they probably shouldn't be taking on, doing it in a geographic location where they're really not competent, and just trying to get another transaction to make up for some lost income. And the Real Estate Commission has really started cracking down on competency issues with brokers, because of course the broker is responsible for the competency of the agent. And so they've really started cracking down on that. So really, we encourage you to not try to take on a transaction where you're really not the best option for that individual, for that type of transaction or that geographic location. They really have started cracking down on that. So, Tan, go ahead.
Hey, Don,
Hey.
talk about geographic competency. Let's say if I live in the South Pearland area, can I do transaction in the North like Conroe? Is that too far or what?
No, that's fine. So here's the deal. And Marty, if Marty's still in, maybe he can jump in on this too. For me, it's always been, do I have the ability, even if I'm not, and as far as competency is concerned, do I have the ability to adequately advise my client as to, if it's a buyer, what they should offer, if it's a seller, what they should sell for? So being in the MLS area would be a large part of that. It may not be everything, but it is a large part of that, having that ability to become, if you're not competent in terms of, I need some punching up, but I know the area, I know what's there, and I know things like that, then I don't think we have any problem being in Pearland selling in Conroe, or being in Conroe selling in Pearland. We're talking about much further out.
We might have more of a problem with Austin or Dallas if you've never been there, because the markets are different. Even though it's the state of Texas, or even rural properties that, may have issues like septic or irrigation or whatever, which you're not familiar with. But yeah, its competency really is, we're kind of in the HER metroplex, if you will, around the 7 counties, as Don said, we have no problem with. But if you're driving 4 hours to a place that you've not been, you may not have the expertise, or you can't gain the expertise without joining the local MLS to have competency. So, and then especially different types of real estate. And so where we usually see it is oftentimes when you are doing homes, you've done homes, and you jump in and start doing commercial industrial buildings. Well, you don't have the competency in that type yet. You need some shadowing, if you will. Don?
I see.
Yep.
Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I like the way you put that, an overall market view. I think overall, the same type of market that we have in Pearland is probably the same type of market that we have. I know that there are differences in terms of locality and things like that, but and as long as you feel confident that you can represent them completely in that area, I think we're fine. So, Catherine, go ahead.
Also, Don, that kind of depends on your due diligence and how you research an area. Example, if I have someone like who wants something in League City and I'm up here in the Woodlands area, I'm familiar with League City and I'm familiar with all parts of town because I'm an old lady and I've been around a long time. And I used to install software in doctor's offices, so I had to go everywhere. But my point is that I went and got a room there and stayed a couple of days and made sure I knew that area. Now, the house price they were wanting made that to where that was an efficient way to deal with it. But that's what I've done before. But, I think that you need to do your due diligence to make sure you know that area, even if it is in your MLS, because if not, I knew a girl who sold a house at a location and did not know there was a secondary HOA in that subdivision that was exorbitant and got sued.
Oh,
And that, was when I was at KW. And whenever it happened, she was a very seasoned agent. It was a shock, and she was mortified. And I think they negotiated, and she gave back part of her commission to help take care of it for at least the first year, and then let the client decide if she wanted to sell and leave or whatever. But
Yeah.
but you know, you if you're going to try to do something like that, you still need to make sure you do your due diligence in knowing what's around there. And there's ways to get pricing for houses all around the if you look enough ways.
Yeah, there are definitely horror stories out there that are tied to competency for sure, and that's one right there. So, all right, thank you for that. So, market area, just make sure that two things: one, clearly defined, that it is. If anybody takes a look at this document, they would be able to tell whether or not whatever property we're talking about falls into that market area or not. And so, like I said, it could be as small as one street address. It can be as large as the area where you are competent. The fourth one, term, here's the other way. And Marty mentioned it a little while ago. The other way that you can try to limit this document to where the buyer will feel comfortable, potentially feel more comfortable signing it. And it's based on time. And I prefer time to market area. And we talked about the danger of market areas, that, you know, we have 3 houses on the market area, and on the way to looking at one of them, they find another one that suddenly they want to look at. Looks great from the outside. Now I want to see it. I've used 2 weeks whenever I was working with a buyer. And I'm going to toot my own horn here. I never in my whole entire career, since the time that buyer representation agreements have existed, which was 1992, by the way, I've never shown property without having a buyer representation agreement in place. And I know there's a couple of people on the call here who have been agents of mine at other companies before, and they know that that's exactly how I used to teach it, that you would get a buyer representation agreement in writing before you ever went out and showed property. And so we would try to limit it this way. We'd say, here, give me 2 weeks. Give me the opportunity for the next 2 weeks. We'll go out and look at any property you want to go and look at, and I will be your agent. I'll answer any question that I can answer for you. And then at the end of 2 weeks, we're going to sit down. We're going to sit down, or maybe sooner. If you come to a decision before the 2 weeks, then we will sit down. And if you feel like that I'm capable of doing the job that you've hired me to do, then we will extend the time period. We'll get that 1505. We'll get that TXR 1505 amendment to buyer representation agreement, and we'll extend it to the period of time that we actually need. Is it a risk? Absolutely. As the agent, am I willing to take that risk? Yeah, I am, because either you are going to feel like I'm capable of doing the job or you're not. And I'm going to do the job that I do. And if you feel like I'm not capable of doing that job, then fine. Go ahead, go somewhere else and try to find somebody who you think will do that job. That makes perfect sense to me. If you don't think that I'm capable, then go ahead. It's entirely up to you. But if you think I can do the job, then let's go ahead and extend this, and now I become your agent. And I had very good luck with that. And I had times where they would say, no, let's just go ahead and make it for the entire time. And if I've come along somewhere along the way and I don't feel like you're doing your job, then we'll sit down and have a discussion about it, and we'll figure out what to do from there. But everybody kind of has their own way of doing it. But those 2 ways, market area and term, is a good way to try to limit this, because what are you telling that buyer? I'm willing to take the risk. I mean, it shows confidence, and I think it shows competence, and I think it shows that you have enough confidence in your ability that you can represent them and look out for their best interests, which is what they're looking for anyway. So anyway, I hope that helps a little bit, because I know how difficult this is to try to get somebody to do it. It's always been harder to get a buyer representation agreement signed than it has been a listing agreement signed. Always. It's always been harder to do. And that's why everybody pushed it off until later. Think about a listing agreement. When do I try to get the listing agreement signed? After I've done a listing presentation. I've done my listing presentation. I've had the opportunity to at least prove myself, at least to some level, with that seller. I'm not walking in there and saying, here's my listing agreement, sign it. But that's pretty much what I'm doing with the buyer rep. I get it. I understand it. I know how difficult it is. It's not an easy thing to do. It's like, I'm sorry, but you have to hire me first. And that's one of the ways that I try to put it, is that I can't go to work for you until you hire me. Those are terms that they may kind of understand. If you want me to come to work for you, which is what we're talking about here, you have to hire me. And so this is the contract. This is the hiring contract. It's the employment contract. Listing agreements and buyer reps are employment contracts. If we think about it right, it makes it easier to try to give that to the buyer. And I'm sorry I keep harping on this. It's just that it is so critical that we have this done at the right time, even more so than it's ever been. It's always been important that we got it done at the right time, but now it's no longer a strong suggestion. It's mandatory. It is you got to do it. So go ahead, Marty.
I think this is one of those things too. You're in business for yourself. The confidence you have to say, this is what I'm worth. I'm gonna wow you so much that you're gonna think this is a bargain. And on top of that, I'm gonna try to get the seller to pay for it for you. But this is my value, and you're hiring me, hiring the best, whatever it may be in this area, to watch out for your interests. And I think that's a lot of it is we undersell ourselves as agents. And no, this is you are hiring me. I'm applying for the job, and you're gonna hire somebody. And you don't want to hire anybody else because they're schlubs, right? So, so you got to hire the best. So,
yeah, and a lot of coaching programs talk about that. How agents spend so much time becoming excellent negotiators for their clients that they will fight and fight and fight and fight for their clients. But they don't fight and fight and fight and fight for themselves. That they will sell themselves short all the time, but they'll fight to the bitter end for their client, but they don't do the same thing for themselves, which in a lot of ways, if they did do it for themselves, it would prove to their client that they're going to do it for them as well. It's like, man, you sure gave that up easily. If you're going to give that up for yourself, what are you going to do when it comes time? In fact, and that's how we, a lot of times that's how we work on listing agreements. Well, so-and-so says they'll do it for this much. Well, wow, they sure gave up some money pretty quickly. What do you think they're gonna do when it comes to you? So yeah, Catherine, go ahead.
Well, I had a training once in another brokerage, and one of the things that I'll never forget that the guy said when he was doing the presentation is, he said, if you don't feel like I'm worth that, he said, if I don't take care of my money, what am I going to do for you? They'll sign it right away because you made a stand to let them know you're worth it. Now, that's me saying that, and y'all know how much I usually give away, but there's reasons for that.
Well, giving it away is not always a bad thing. Think of it as an investment. What am I getting in return? You know, if I'm giving up some commission somewhere and I'm getting multiple deals or, something like that, that's one thing. That's, it doesn't necessarily mean that I hold hard and fast every single time, because all of us, there's probably not one person on this call who at some point in time hasn't given up something. I know I have. So, all right. 5 and 6 kind of go together hand in hand. And it's the obligations of both sides. Creates expectations. One of the things that's really necessary in any agreement is for both parties to understand what their obligations are, understand what the expectations are. I've said this 1,000 times. I know Gail's heard it 1,000 times because Gail and I have worked together for many years. And one of the things, the guy who was my mentor in real estate told me this long ago, and it's something that I've never forgotten. He says, conflict rarely exists when expectations are met. And that has always just I have understood that and believed that for forever. That as long as you understand what my job is, what my obligations are, what I'm supposed to do, if I have done that, then there's not really shouldn't be any conflict between us. But that goes both ways. This is a two-way street. This is a contract, which means you've got obligations, I've got obligations. And as long as we both live up to those, I shouldn't be upset with you. You shouldn't be upset with me. There really shouldn't be any conflict. And that comes into play, especially, and I do a lot of this on the listing side, that it's not my job to sell your house, period. That's not my job. My job is to expose your property to the point to where somebody comes and buys it, not me. You don't judge me as your listing agent. You don't judge me by how many buyers I drag across your threshold, because I could drag 100 people across your threshold if you wanted me to. So anyway, broker obligations. Broker uses their best efforts to assist the client in acquiring property in the market area. Remember, the parties here is the broker. It's not Marty who's doing the work. It's you, obviously. And so what's the broker's best effort? We're going to trust our representative to go out there and do the job, do the things that need to be done to help this buyer find a property. And of course, comply with the other provisions. Client's obligations work exclusively through the broker in acquiring property and inform other brokers, salespersons, sellers, and landlords with whom the client may have contact that the broker exclusively represents the client for the purpose of acquiring property. This might be a good one to actually go over with the buyer to make sure they understand what the expectations are. What does this tell them? You are tied to me. Don't go get tied to somebody else. Not while you're still tied to me. Going and signing another buyer representation agreements puts you in violation of both. It puts you in violation of ours because it says that you will not sign another one with somebody else. It puts you in violation of theirs because it also says you're not currently under obligation to anybody else. So now you are in violation of both. We would need to make sure they understand that. Broker compensation. This one has been a tough one, especially when you don't get it signed when you're supposed to get it signed. We get a lot of these where they put 0 in A. And why would they put 0 in broker's fees? Well, because I know the buyer's not paying it. We're already under contract. I know the seller's picking it up, so I can put 0 here. 100% incorrect. This is an authorization. This is an authorization for you as the buyer's agent to get paid. Has nothing to do with source. It has to do with whether or not you are going to be paid for the job that you're doing. You put 0 there, guess what you're going to be paid? 0. The number that you are going to be paid, no matter what the source is, coming from the buyer, coming from the seller directly, coming from the listing broker, does not matter. The amount you are going to be paid from any source needs to go in there. And so when we see people put 0, number one, that tells us most likely they have got this done after they've gone under contract and they're not understanding what it's about. And the reason they're putting 0 is because they know the seller's picking it up. They think this is what the buyer is committing to paying the agent. This is what the buyer is committing to the agent to receive from any source. And so, yes, from the very beginning, because we're getting this signed at the beginning before we go out and show property or anything else, yes, the buyer is committing to paying whatever number we stick in there. And that's why it creates that conflicting language in the sales contract, because agents and buyers both are not understanding that based on timing of this document, at this point in time, the buyer is committing to making sure the agent gets this money. Well, right now, since we haven't gone under contract to sell anything, we've not had the opportunity to transfer or shift the burden to someone else. Yes, this is the buyer's burden right now. But unless you want to do the transaction for nothing, that's what we're asking the buyer to do. Buyer, we are asking you to commit to us that for working with you, that we're going to be paid this much money. And then we'll figure out the source as we go along. And so at this point, if we're really having that discussion with the buyer may very well pull back on that. Oh, wait a minute. I don't know that I don't want to have to pay you 3%, or I don't want to have to pay you 4%, or I don't want to have to pay you 2.5%. Okay, I get it. I get it. I understand it. Well, so I don't really know if I want to sign this yet. Well, I don't work for free. And until we figure out what's going on the other side, this is what I'm going to receive. Well, how about you put 0 now, and then later on, after we figure it out, we go and we change the document, we put the amount in. That goes against the nature of the agreement. The agreement was the buyer needs to know going into it what we're going to be paid. This whole thing, this whole NAR settlement thing is all about transparency, not being transparent from the very beginning when it came to negotiating commissions. This is us negotiating a commission with the seller, except it's the other side of the transaction. So here's what I tell them. Here's what I would tell them. All right, so I'm expecting to be paid 2.5% on sales price. Well, okay, but I'm not sure I want to pay that. Okay, that's fine. I get that. I understand it. Before we go out and look at any property, I'm going to be contacting the listing agent to see whether or not this is covered by either themselves or by the seller directly. Well, what happens if you don't find out? Then you'll decide if you want to go ahead and go see that property or not, because even if they don't offer it, we can still ask for it. There's nothing to stop us from asking for it. If you decide, buyer, if you decide that the property that you want to go and look at is not going to pay me the amount of money and you don't want to pick up the difference, then we won't go look at it. Well, what if I want to see it? Well, then you're going to have to make that decision. You're going to have to make that decision as to whether or not it's worth it to you or not. Well, will you come off that? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not going to commit to that right now. Under some circumstances, maybe. If I need to, in order to make it work, maybe. But it's a different conversation. It is a completely different conversation than it's ever been. Anyway, whatever source that's going to be paying it, that number needs to go in there. Don't put 0. And don't leave it blank, and don't put TBD, to be determined. It has to be an actual number. You can't put in there negotiable or to be determined or any of those things. It has to say a specific amount. Yeah, Tam, go ahead.
Don, again, let me ask a question. Let's say originally you go show a house that say 3%, you're assuming 3%, okay? But it turned out like that you look at 5 houses and then the 5th house said that 2%. So you do an amendment or you do a new broker representation?
Amendment.
Okay.
So yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because it's a good point, because we have some decisions to make here. So we have 3% there. The house I want to make an offer on says 2%. And so at this point, we have to make sure the buyer's clear here that because the property you're buying is only going to pay me 2% and you and I have agreed to 3%, at this point in time, you're picking up 1%. And then, of course, the conversation from there can go to, but I would not do that to you. I'll be satisfied with the 2%. So we'll go and do an amendment to change this number to 2%. And now the 2 numbers match. That's what has to happen. The 2 numbers have to match. And so what else could we do? Well, I could ask for the other 1% in the contract. So if the 2% is being offered, I could ask for the other 1% in the contract too. See if maybe they would go ahead and agree to it, even though they haven't offered it. Just remember, we're talking about offers here. And that doesn't mean that that's the way it has to stay. It's just what's being offered. So there's a lot of different ways that this could be handled. Elena, hey, go ahead.
Hi, good morning. I have a question because I just face a similar scenario. When do we amend? Right now, I got into a contract, or what my client got into a contract with the 2% commission share with buyer's agent. My buyer representation states 3%. I don't know what's going to happen right now because we are during the option period. When should I be signing the amendment or submitting the buyer's rep amendment?
That is such a good question. That is such a good question. The NAR rule says that at the time it's discovered that the numbers are going to be different. That's why, and we haven't looked at the amendment yet, but if you look at the amendment, there's a place for you to put the address. And so if this says 3 and you're accepting 2, you do the 1505 and say, I'm accepting 2, or that the number is going to be 2 on this address. That way, if that deal falls out, you're back at the 3.
Okay. So I have to look at that form. When you move into that form, I look at it. So that amendment, when we amend the buyer's rep, the amendment clearly it specifies that particular address. It's not like a blank.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, that makes sense.
That is such a good question. It's such a good question because, there is a place to put in the actual address where it will only apply to that one address.
Okay, well, my client hasn't decided if she's going to pay me that 1% because we're in the option period. She's aware, but you know how clients are. So let's see what happens. Well, thank you. I'm going to look when you're moving from this one to the amendment because that's interesting.
Okay. No problem. Okay. So B talks about, of course, where is that money coming from? And so maybe this will make the buyer feel a little more comfortable. Broker will seek to obtain payment of the fees specified in paragraph 7A. And this is language that's always been in the buyer rep. And so it's just always been glossed over so much. I hate to say this, but all of this mess that we've gone through, in a lot of cases, it's because agents got lazy. It's because this language has always been there. It's always been in the buyer representation agreement. It's just that it became so common that we were being paid by the other side. It's the way the conversation went. So I'm going to get paid 3%, but you don't have to worry about it. It'll all be coming from the other side. The seller will be paying it. And that's how the conversation used to go. That's what got us in trouble, because that's not the way that it was supposed to be presented. It is, buyer, you are committing to this right now, but we're going to do everything we can to shift it to the other side, which is like what it says, that we are going to seek to obtain payment from that number, first from the seller, landlord, or their agents. And if such persons refuse or fail to pay, client, buyer, will pay the broker the amount specified less any amount that the broker on the other side has already agreed to pay. It's the same language. It's always been in there. It's not any different than it's ever been. It's just that we used to gloss over it and say, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. That's why it was always that a lot of people like working with buyers better than sellers, because sellers would try to cut them down on commission, but buyers would just let them get whatever they asked for because it wasn't coming out of their pocket. Well, it's just the way that it used to be. So, all right. Earned and payable, of course, talks about when we've earned it, which of course is when we bring a ready, willing, and able buyer. And then, of course, payable just means that the only time we're actually going to receive it is when we get to closing. Contracts are not fully executed until we get to closing. House is bought, house is sold. That's when we get paid. Marty, you got something?
Just a comment that in some states, they went so far as to add this to the purchase contract where we have it now where the seller pays the broker directly, 12A1B. But they had in Washington, California, they have a place where the buyer agrees that the buyer broker received this much. that they acknowledge that, yep, we've agreed that they're going to get so much. I'm glad it's not that way here. So
Yeah, right. Yeah. Ooh. No. D, acquisition of brokers listing and an intermediary transaction. This one is a kind of interesting one too. If the client acquires a property listed by the broker, which means an intermediary deal, the compensation that brokers offer to other brokers in the listing agreement with the owner will be credited toward the broker's fees. And then that means that whatever is being offered on the listing side is what we're going to accept. We won't ask the buyer to make any additional payment if we're doing an intermediary deal. Additional compensation, any other compensation that might be paid along the ways. I don't think we have anything. I know there's a lot of companies that have other compensation that's going to be paid, but not us. We don't have anything else. Notice regarding bonuses. And that's in the 1505 as well, that if we do get to a transaction where a bonus is being offered, we can still receive it, but the buyer is going to have to acknowledge that before we can receive it. And so typically, of course, that's probably going to happen with builders and things like that. But there's a place in the 1505 where bonuses have their own section rather than in with the actual compensation itself. And probably the reason for that is that usually the compensation is a percentage of sales price. Bonuses are usually a straight dollar amount. And so you would have to be trying to calculate percentages or whatever if you were throwing a bonus in on top of commission. So they separated that out. Protection period. I've always said this is probably one of the most worthless provisions in this agreement and the listing agreement, but it does serve some purpose. And of course, this is missing in the 1507 too, by the way. So the protection period says that it's at time starting the day after the agreement ends and going for a certain number of days. And it talks about the fact that we have some sort of protection if we have shown properties to this buyer and we get to the end of the agreement and then the buyer goes and purchases that property directly from the seller in order to try to cut us out, that we are protected for whatever number of days we put in there. And I see a lot of people put in like 10 days and things like that. That's not enough time. It doesn't give us a lot of protection, but for whatever protection it does provide, I want 180 days. I put in a 90 is bare minimum. I want them to have to wait so long before they try to cut us out that it won't be worth their while. It won't be worth that time to wait. But here's the part that makes it almost worthless. You can put whatever number of days you want in there. And if at the end of our buyer representation agreement, the buyer goes and signs another buyer representation agreement with another agent, your protection period's gone. There is none. Remember that this document is there to protect the industry, not to protect us as individuals. They don't care if it's you that gets paid. They don't care if it's me that gets paid. They don't care as long as somebody gets paid, as long as some agent somewhere gets paid. So, and you see it there, it's in those last couple of sentences. This paragraph 7F will not apply, which means it's worthless if the client is, during the protection period, bound under a representation agreement with another broker who is a member of the Texas Realtors at the time of the acquisition, is negotiated, and the other broker is going to be paid a fee. So if they've gone with another agent who is a realtor, by the way, and signed an agreement with them, our agreement is gone. It's worthless. Listing agreement says the same thing. Escrow authorization just talks about the fact that the buyer authorizes and the broker may allow that we can get paid directly at the time of closing. And then county, and this one we see a lot of mistakes too. Amounts payable to the broker are to be paid in cash in blank county. This has nothing to do with the property is located. It has to do where the brokerage is located. Money is paid to the brokerage. And it doesn't matter where the title company is either. The brokerage is paid in Harris County, Texas. So no matter where the property is, no matter where the title company is, no matter any of that, it's where is the broker going to be paid? The broker is going to be paid in Harris County. So Harris County, Texas. There never should be any question as to what county that could be. A lot of people think it's wherever the property is. That's not where payment takes place. Representations. Each person signing this agreement represents that they have the legal capacity and authority to bind themselves to this agreement. The client represents that the client is not now a party to another buyer or tenant representation agreement with another broker for the acquisition of property in the market area. Client represents that all the information that they are giving is true and correct. And if there's any kind of relocation company that's going to maybe be providing resources or be providing assistance in any way, we would put that there. And the broker is not authorized to execute any document in the name of or on behalf of the client concerning the property. If you remember your agency class, 8E is all about special agency. The fact that you and I do not have the authority to bind the client to anything. We've had questions before as to whether or not can I be the power of attorney for my client. According to that, absolutely, positively not. You don't have the authority to bind the client to anything. You don't have the authority. With a power of attorney, you have changed this agreement. Now, if it's a spouse or somebody like that, that may be a little bit different. But for our clients, we cannot be their signatory. We cannot sign on their behalf. Intermediary, number 9, intermediary status. That's a yes or a no. Go ahead and mark yes. Even if you don't plan on doing both sides yourself, remember, intermediary is not just you. It's any other agent in this company. Any of the 1,500 plus agents that we have here could also be intermediary, where it could be their listing and you could be working the buyer, or vice versa. It could be your listing and they were working the buyer. That's intermediary as well. So you want to make sure and put in A. You do need to explain how it works to make sure they're not going to have a problem with it. I've not really run into anybody who has a problem with intermediary with appointments. I've run into plenty who have had a problem with intermediary without appointments, where they're fine as long as 2 separate agents, because they still have you. They still have you. They still have your advice. They still have your opinion, and they're okay with that. What they don't like is intermediary without appointments, which pulls you into this same box that Marty is in as intermediary, which means no advice, no opinion to either side. You become a facilitator. Seller, tell me what you want, I'll pass it on to the buyer. Buyer, tell me what you want, I'll pass it on to the seller. No advice, no opinion. Sorry, don't ask me anything, because unless it's general information, I can't help you. Buyers and sellers tend to not like that. We don't like it either, tell you the truth. We don't like the idea of intermediary without appointments, only under very limited circumstances, because now all of a sudden you have put one of our clients in a position where they are receiving less than what they would have had. If we have a listing agreement with somebody, then that's single agency. We provide advice and opinion and old car and all that stuff. Now, if we pull a buyer in and we start representing the buyer doesn't get any more, because they're not going to get advice and opinion. All it does is it puts buyer and seller on a level playing field. And the way we achieve the level playing field is by taking things away from the seller. That's not a good idea, because now all of a sudden nobody gets anything. So we really tend to try to shy away from intermediary without appointments. Go ahead, Marty.
Well, you enter into a relationship with the seller up front with an agreement for, I'm going to make this amount of money for doing this job. And now you're saying, hey, I'm doing the job, but I'm going to modify the agreement and give you less, but still take the same amount of money. The seller likely would say, well, why don't you make less then if you're giving me less, right? You're modifying the agreement. You're amending it basically, what you promised to do. Now you're saying, I no longer promise to do that, so I can facilitate this transaction. And whereas Don said, the best idea is to hand that buyer off to somebody else that has full service. You can maintain your agreement, or obviously have the buyer be unrepresented. So, yep.
I always like to think, how would this sound if I was sitting in the witness chair? It's like, okay, so let me wrap my head around this, and so the jury can hear it too. So you're telling us that your job as an agent is to look out for the best interest of your client, right? Yeah, that's my fiduciary duty, is to look out for the best interest of my client. Can you explain to me, Mr. Leonard, how this is in the best interest of my client, the seller, when they would have received all of this assistance? If you were just on their side, they would have received all of this valuable advice and opinion. You say that you've got locked up in your head, that how they would have received all of that. But now that you're representing the other side of the transaction too, you're making twice as much money, and they're getting less information. They're getting less assistance. Whose best interest are you looking out for? You know, I mean, I can just imagine how that would sound. It wouldn't sound good. So anyway, what do you think, Marty?
Yeah, I think you have a hard time saying, yeah, it was in their interest.
Yeah,
Really.
in their best interest. Well, my advice and opinion's not that good anyway, so it's not.
I'm actually doing them a favor.
I was really helping them out because I don't know anything. All right, let's move on here. Next section, section 10, competing clients. And of course, competing clients just has to do with no exclusivity in terms of the properties that we are showing the buyer. It tells them that, hey, just because we're showing you the property doesn't mean that we're taking it off the market for any other buyer we might have that's looking for the same thing. It's kind of like, if you put it into the terms of a listing agreement, it would be like you going out on a listing appointment in a neighborhood, and the house that you're looking at listing is a 1,700 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage. And you get through the end of it, and they say, well, I think I might be interested in hiring you to list my property. And you would say to them, gee, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to do that. I've got another one down the street listed. That's the same floor plan, the same size house and all that. And because it competes with you, I'm not going to be able to take yours. I don't think we would ever have that discussion with the seller. Heck yeah, I'll take it. But they need to understand here too, there's not exclusivity. Just because I've shown it to you doesn't mean I wouldn't show it to somebody else. Confidential information.
Hey, Don, on that, talk about, this is one of those things where it doesn't happen a lot now, but it happened a lot in the past. Let's say that I'm working with buyers in certain price range. I'm showing the same dang properties to the same buyers over and over because that's what's on the market, right? And all of a sudden, I have 2 or 3 buyers that all want to buy the same property.
Yep.
How do you handle that?
Well, you know, where is it here? There's a place that talks about that the terms of your offer may not be kept confidential, and that really comes down to what the seller allows. It kind of depends on which way do you go, but you see it under B here, 11B, unless otherwise agreed to or required by law, a seller or seller's agent is not obliged to keep the existence of an offer or its terms confidential. If a listing agent receives multiple offers, the listing agent is obliged to treat the competing buyers fairly. So what they're saying here is that if you share one offer's information, you have to share them all. That everybody knows what everybody has. And the other side of the spectrum is you don't tell anybody ever anything.
Right. Now, on the listing side, when a buyer's agent tells you or you get an offer, you want to use that as leverage for other buyers' agents, other buyers to raise their offer on behalf of your seller. Just know that as a buyer's agent, when you share something with the listing broker, they're going to use that, for their seller's advantage. On the buyer side, to Lena's point there too, when you have 3, I always talk to my buyers, look, to put your best interest forward, make an offer. Generally, I'm going to work with the first person that wants to put the offer in, because now we're advocating for, how do I advocate for two different buyers on the same property that they're competing against each other, right? Yeah. Then you're like almost in an intermediary thing where I've got duties to one buyer and duties to another buyer, and they're not signing an agreement allowing that to happen, right? So, yeah.
Yep.
Elena?
Yeah, Marty, that happened to me, and it was horrible. And the two families, they really, really wanted me to represent them. And it was on Elif years ago. And I was going crazy because both of them put me into this corner that I do want you to write that offer. So at that point, I wrote the two offers. And I was like, I'm sorry, listing agent, you choose the best. I had to keep calm. I was not giving advice. I just wrote each one, and I never told each other what I was writing, because it was a nightmare, and I will never do that ever again. I learned my lesson from that one.
I've done this many times where I tell my two buyers, I say, look, Joe over here wrote the offer first. I'm going to hand you off to my partner, Don, who's going to work on your behalf on this one property, so that there's not a conflict. So you have a fair shot, because I've got to advocate for the buyer that stepped up, or whatever. So it is stressful, but they appreciate the fact that you're the integrity of that, saying, look, you both want it. I can't, advocate one for over the other. So I'm going to choose the one that was first. I'll hand you off to a very competent agent on the other side. So, yep.
I agree. Same thing. Yeah. I've had that situation before too, where I've had to pass them off to somebody else and say, that is just on this one. And make sure that whoever you pass them off to doesn't keep them completely, because somebody's not going to get that house. And so if it turns out to be the second one, I don't want to lose them as a buyer completely. It's just on this deal. So yeah, absolutely. All right. 12, mediation. We got into a conversation during coffee talk about mediation, arbitration, litigation, all those gations that we try to stay out of if we can. This one, of course, parties agreed to negotiate in good faith. And of course, on the sales contract, who are the parties, buyer and seller? Here, of course, it's broker and buyer. In the listing agreement, broker and seller. Mediation, and of course, when it comes to mediation is non-binding. That the mediator will give a solution, will suggest a solution, and if the parties agree, then it becomes binding. Otherwise, it's not. Default: if either party fails to comply, then of course the other party, as the injured party, may have some kind of remedy available to them. Usually we don't run into any situations here. Usually, more than anything, it just the agreement falls apart, and that's going to be it. Attorney's fees. I've never heard, I'm sure there probably have been lawsuits based on listing agreements and buyer reps. It's usually under contracts, but if client or broker is prevailing party, if any legal proceeding as a result of this dispute, such party will be entitled to recover from the non-prevailing party all costs of such proceeding and reasonable attorney's fees. And of course, sales contract says the same thing. Sounds good. It sounds like, oh, good. If anything like that ever occurs, then if I win, then I can recover all costs of such proceeding and reasonable attorney's fees. Well, I'm here as living proof that that's another provision that probably is not worth much of anything at all. I had a lawsuit in 2002 that ended up costing me, to be found innocent, by the way, to be found innocent, it cost me $137,500 to be found innocent, and I was able to potentially recover about $29,000. And I even ended up not getting that. So, that I'm not sure exactly what that's worth. 15, limitation of liability. Neither broker nor any other broker or their associates responsible or liable for any person's personal injuries or for loss or damage of any person's property that is not caused by the broker. Client will hold broker, any other broker, their associates harmless. This is that indemnification thing that we see that required from our clients to us. Client will indemnify the broker against any claims for injury or damage that client may have caused to others or their property. And a lot of these provisions seem like, yeah, probably doesn't mean anything. I had a buyer when I owned my Remax office. One of my agents was out showing property. The seller was at home. The seller told the agent and the buyer, do not go in the backyard. My dog is back there. I put the dog back there. I can't leave right now, so I put the dog back there. The buyer went, looked around the property, walked in the back gate into the backyard, and it was a pit bull, and pit bull got a hold of it and nearly ripped her ankle off. And you were told. And so luckily, we were not held accountable for that. Client indemnified us for any claim or injury that they may cause to others or to their property. They caused it. They caused it. They went because they went in where they were told not to go in. So anyway, addenda, the other documents that may be part of the buyer representation agreement, we have the IABS, we have the general information and notice to buyers and sellers. 1507 also doesn't include this. It doesn't include the ability for us to add other documents as part of that buyer representation package, if you will, that we require buyers to sign. Special provisions, normally not very much stuff to put there. And then the last part's the 18 additional notices, federal fair housing information, the fact that we are not inspectors, and so the buyer should not be expecting us to render opinions on condition of property or anything like that. C is a throwback to the original License Act that says that we need to tell a buyer not to purchase a property without having the title checked. That's what C says. D talks about the ability to buy a home warranty if they would like. That is a rule in the state of Texas that buyers have to be made aware that those things exist. E, when viewing a property, client might be recorded or otherwise monitored without the client's consent or knowledge. Additionally, consult an attorney before recording or photographing a property without the owner's knowledge or consent. So my understanding, and maybe Marty can chime in here on that as well. My understanding is that sellers have the right to monitor. They don't have the right to record. That's always been my understanding, that they have the right to do that. And I tell buyers from day one, you might as well figure that every house that we walk into, you are being watched and listened to from the Ring doorbell all the way through. And so there's a lot of the stuff that comes into play there. Don't criticize, don't do all of that. If you have an interest in this property, you might want to keep it to yourself right now, because if you walk in there and you say, oh man, I love this property so much, I'd pay full price for it. Well, there goes your ability to negotiate probably. So, Marty, you got something on that?
No, yeah, 100% agree. Sellers are watching, and there's, like you said, Ring equipment. They can't record and save it, and yet many of the Ring cameras do. We've had some that were agents were caught doing things they shouldn't be caught and were fired. But the negotiation part, I've had buyer agents with their clients stand in the driveway and discuss offer terms, and it's picked up by the Ring doorbell. And so, that just blew it for them. So even not even on the property, don't be discussing the property, negative things or offer things, you're going to hurt yourself. So, yep.
Yeah.
Many times as well, they, on a listing side, it makes sense to put little placards up. You are being recorded. You are being whatever, if there is recording equipment there. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I say you just well figure you are. Just act like you are. That way you're covered. We had a transaction where the sellers, we were representing the buyers. We represented the buyers and the seller. No, take that back. We represented the sellers. We were representing the sellers, and the sellers were a same-sex couple. And the buyers put the contract in on the property. We're having the property inspected, and the buyers and the inspector were standing in the house making fun, looking at their pictures and making fun of them and really saying some derogatory things. And so, of course, now after the inspection, buyers come up with this list of repairs that they wanted to have done. Obviously, the seller said, yeah, go punch sand because, you know, you're not going to get anything from us. And they just said, we are not going to do any repairs. And they wanted us as their representative to not tell them why until after the deal fell apart. And so, of course, the deal did fall apart because they had these repairs they wanted done. Seller said no. And so the buyer's agent sent us a termination of contract. Then we contacted the buyer's agent and said, this is why. And I left the buyer's agent out, but the buyer's agent was in on it too. Buyer agent, inspector, were all in there making fun of the sellers and saying things about them. So, you know, that's obviously wrong anyway. They were lucky that they didn't get hit with a discrimination suit, honestly. So, all right, the rest of this, F, to reduce risk of wire fraud. We know all the issues that we have with wire fraud, so there is a warning there. And I know some of our agents, some of you guys use the wire fraud warning, and of course we have it on the HomeSmart disclosure too. Still, even with that, all of these warnings that are out there, still there are parties that have that end up losing money. I don't know if you would have seen it or not, but about 2 weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, there was somebody who had $76,000 that they had sent in supposedly to the title company. It's right here in Houston, that they had sent into the title company, and it was not the title company's bank account. They sent it in, and the loan officer is a friend of mine. And the loan officer is the one who actually helped the buyers get that money back. They were one of the few. They were actually able to get their money back, but it was sent, but before it was claimed, they were able to get their money back. So anyway, all right, there's our buyer representation agreement. So now we're going to flip over and we're going to go to the 1505, which is the amendment to the representation agreement, and look at on what circumstances would we be using that. So let me switch documents here. Start presenting that one. And go to this one. All right, can everybody see that one okay? Everybody see the amendment to buyer representation agreement? Good deal. Okay, great, thank you. So, of course, this is the 1505. This is the things that we would have to do to make changes in order to make our original agreement compliant with whatever change we needed to make. Sometimes it may happen before we find a property. We would do this to extend our agreement, especially if we did that, like I had mentioned before, we did it for 1 week or 2 weeks or something like that. And so now we need to extend it. We would do that. If we need to change our market area, there is a way to do that too. A and B are probably the most common changes that we would need to make before we go under contract. If we needed to expand our market area, we probably would just leave it alone if we were just contracting. If we had Harris and the adjacent counties and they have exhausted everything that they thought was available in Montgomery County and said, yeah, I don't think we're going to be able to find it there. The type of house we're looking for is just too expensive in Montgomery County, so we're going to have to stay in Harris County. I probably wouldn't go and change the agreement. You never know, tomorrow a new one may pop up in Montgomery County that might work. I probably wouldn't reduce my market area. I might expand it, but I probably wouldn't reduce it. So the agreement says on or about whatever date you originally created it, client and broker entered into a buyer tenant representation agreement. Effective today's date is the date that would go in there, or the date that you're amending it. Client and broker amend the agreement as follows. A and B would, A changes market area, B extends the agreement. C would be if we were using the 1507 originally, if we were flipping over to full service or just showing service, and whether or not they'd allow intermediary. But since we don't use a 1507 here, there's nothing there that you should probably be ever filling in. So here's where we were talking about before about making changes to the amount that I'm going to receive. So on the 1501, the first one under D, D has to do with commissions only. And so on a purchase, this would be my new number, whatever this new number is going to be here. If the old number was 3 and I'm now going to accept 2, then 2 would go here. Or if I'm changing a flat fee amount there. And here's where you would have that one address. If the client purchases the following property. So what does that say? If this turns out to be the property, I'm taking 2. What happens if this doesn't turn out to be the property? We go back to the original agreement. That says 3. So you can do that. And you could do more than one property. It should have said property or properties in case we had more than one that we were considering. You could have done that too. But anyway, that's where you would just limit it to one property where, okay, I get it. This property looks like one that you want so badly that if they're only going to pay me 2, then I'm not going to hold you back from getting this property. So I'll go ahead and accept 2 because that's what they're offering. So got that address there. And the same possibility exists if this were a lease where you can add in that one property as well. E talks about bonuses. If I'm working with a builder and the builder's offering me a bonus, then again, the amount of the bonus, because they typically think of bonuses as a dollar amount, not a percentage. It could be a percentage, but they want a dollar amount there. So you'd have to go ahead and extrapolate that out. And again, for that one property, this could not say for any property or anything like that. I'm sorry, it has to be specific. It has to be an actual property address. You cannot put in there that I get the bonus on any property that they end up buying. It has to be specific in the address. So you would do that anytime when you find out that there is a change in the commission from what you originally agreed to, plus or minus either one. If it's more money, you definitely have to fill this in because the buyer has not authorized you to receive more money, but you also need to fill it out if you are accepting less money and not charging the buyer for the difference. If you're charging the buyer for the difference, then it needs to stay the same. If you are not going to charge the buyer for the difference, you need to go ahead and put the new amount in here because that relieves the buyer of the remaining burden. Gail, go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering if anyone had come across with a new build, the buyer actually asking for the bonus to be applied to their purchase price rather than allowing the agent to have it, and if that's even possible.
Have you?
No, but I'm just curious because I could see that coming up.
We talked about that possibility way back when we started talking about this, when the settlement happened back in November. We had talked about that possibility, and not just that, but even an additional commission or anything. You were willing to do it for this much money. Now all of a sudden you're going to be making more money. Why should that be yours? You know, why, or at least some of it. Yeah, but I agree. And I think it's a great question. And has anybody had a situation like that where a buyer had an issue with you making more money than what you had originally agreed to, where they felt like that they should receive some or all of that additional amount? Do we have anybody who's had that happen? Yeah, maybe not. It's an interesting question. Again, I think sometimes it comes down to embarrassment. Maybe they'd be too embarrassed to ask for it. Maybe those would be my kind of buyer. That's a buyer I want, the one that's too embarrassed to ask for it, because that way I don't have to say no. Marty, what do you think?
No, what we're seeing lately too is where a agent has agreed to credit some of their compensation towards a buyer, but it exceeds what the lender will allow. Then you have to modify that concession, if you will, to take back some of your commission. That's always been an issue where the buyer expects you to give so much, but you can't, you know?
Yeah, true. Yeah. Boy, we run into that a lot where that, especially since commissions have gotten so big that a lot of times, and I mean, because sales prices have gotten so high that the actual dollar amount of commissions has increased so much that if I'm giving half of it back to the buyer, that a lot of times that's going to exceed the maximum amount that will even be allowed by the lender for them to get. I used to offer that anyway, and that's just me. I used to, if I was going to get an additional bonus that I wasn't going to get to begin with, I usually used to maybe try to share it with the buyer in some way and say, can this, some of it be used for that? But I don't know that I've ever had a buyer outright ask for it. And evidently no one else has either. But I'm with you, Gail. I could sure see a situation where they could come up and say, you know, I don't think you're getting paid this from the other side of the transaction because they like you so much. I think you're getting this because of the amount I'm paying in sales price. And some of them may not get to that point on their own. But, you know, it's what it's like. They wouldn't be offering this to you if I wasn't offering the price that I'm offering. So maybe I should get the benefit of some of that. I could sure see how some buyers would get there. Catherine, what were you saying?
I have a question too, Don.
Yeah, Aaron, go ahead. I thought Catherine did.
What I was saying is that I did have a client that asked for a portion back of my 3% because they knew I was getting the BTSA, but not specifically the BTSA.
Yeah, I'm
But-
sure they don't care where it comes from. Money's money.
Yeah, and you know, we had to work on that a little bit because I sold a lot of Perry homes last year. I ran into it.
That's a good point, and that may be a good argument for that. Is like the reason they're paying me a bonus has nothing to do with you purchasing this home. It has to do with my past experience on the homes that I have sold.
Exactly.
Yeah, now that's a good counter to that. That's a good counter to that. I like that. Yeah. Okay. Aaron, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, on the 1501, you was telling us that we in designating a certain area to put on there to show. I came in not knowing where you at. If I have showing somewhere in Katy and in Pearland and in Spring,
Mhm.
do you where would you list all of what line item is that on? Or what number is that on? Do I put
That's
Katy,
three.
Spring?
That's market area. That's in 3. And
Three.
so, like I said, I usually use counties because, and then
Okay.
I use Harris and the adjacent counties. That would take in everything that you mentioned. That would
Okay.
take in Spring. It would take in Katy, which could be Waller County, Fort Bend County, Harris County. It would take in Pearland, which could be Harris County, Brazoria
Okay.
County, maybe even Galveston County to a certain extent. What I like about Harris and the adjacent counties is that it's Harris County and every county that touches Harris County, which would be Montgomery, Waller, Fort Bend, Brazoria, Galveston, Chambers, Liberty. And so,
Okay.
yeah, so that I like that. That's what I have always used because it takes in a large enough area for me that I'm not going to go outside of that anyway. And if I need to, I can always go and amend. I have had to before. I've ended up in Grimes County before where we had to go ahead and amend it, but doing it that way.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And what we didn't do is we didn't really talk about in the market area what really would not work. And it's anything, a lot of times, if you use directionals, if you say Northwest Harris County, where does that begin and where does that end? Because there's no sign when you're headed out Highway 290 that says you are now entering Northwest Harris County. It's like if there's any room for interpretation where the interpretations could be different, you don't want to go there. Even just saying Houston is like, what are you saying? What Houston? What Houston city limits? Houston mailing addresses? Because there are a lot of Houston mailing addresses that are not inside the Houston city limits. And so where exactly are you talking about? And we really just need it to be clear enough that there is no question as to whether or not you are there or not, where somebody can come back later and say, well, sorry, this was not your market area,
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Who else we got? Michael, go ahead. And then
Hey,
Sherry,
Don,
yeah,
since we're in the process of buying a house with my wife, I was wondering, do I need to do the buyer's representation with her?
absolutely.
What about the other notice to buyer and seller form?
We expect exactly the same forms when you're representing yourself.
Perfect.
And it's
Thank you.
usually not just yourself because you have a spouse also and you're representing them. So, but yeah, if the requirements are the same, IABS, listing agreement, IABS, buyer rep, general information form, all the forms are exactly the same. I know it seems redundant, but that's the requirement.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Sherry, go ahead. I don't see you, but you must be muted.
Yes, I'm here.
There you are.
Yes, I wanted to know, I usually use the area numbers associated with the market area when I'm doing my buyer's rep agreement. So for instance, if I am working in Cyprus, I would do area maybe 25, 10, maybe 35 and surrounding areas. Is that okay?
Sherry, how long have you had your license?
For a while.
How long's a while?
More than 5 years.
I'm going. You just don't want to give me a number. You don't want to tell me. It's more than 5 years. I know it's more than 5 years. I'm guessing. What do we have? We have 33 people on the call. I'm guessing the vast majority of these 33 people have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay.
Marty, Marty, are you here? Are you in here?
I'm still here.
Do you know what she's talking about?
I wasn't listening, so I wouldn't know anyway. I'm new here.
Sherry said that on her market area, on the buyer representation agreement, she liked to use area numbers like 10 or 35 or 25. You have any idea what she's talking about?
No. It's not here anyway.
Well,
Can I say something?
So,
I do.
Okay, some of you do.
Yes.
So do I. Here's
Yeah.
the thing. Who do we have to be making this clear to?
Buyers.
Buyers. Do you think buyers have any clue that Katy is in area 25 and 35 and that Cyprus is in area 10 and that downtown could be area 7, 9, 15, 16, 17? Do you think anybody knows that other than a few of us here?
No, I usually explain it to them.
Okay.
And
I here's my issue with that. Is that yes, those are geographic areas, no question about it. But could a typical person know what those geographic areas are unless you're printing out a map for them? And I don't even think the map exists anymore.
You're right.
And so
I do. Yeah, I do.
I would
I'm
suggest
sorry, go ahead.
something else. I love that
Yeah.
you talked about major areas, though. Z areas. We used to call them Z areas. Years ago, 20 years, at least 20 years, right? You've had your license at least 20 years.
No, not that long. Not that long. At least more than 5. But I do like the fact that you mentioned that we can use counties. So I think I'll be using counties now.
There you go.
Thank you.
I hadn't thought about that. Talking about Z areas is like talking about key map pages.
Yes. Or Thomas Guide pages.
I wondered before when somebody was ever going to come up and bring that one up. Just because it is a little obscure.
Yeah. I'm with Elena. I've always liked the Z
so much
areas. I
better.
always thought the Z areas were great.
I love that map. And I gave
Me
all
too.
my mentees a copy of my color map. I still have a copy of it. And I think,
Oh,
Marty,
wow.
I share one with you because they were lost. They couldn't understand Harris County, Broward. They're new agents. And I was like, okay, I'm going to teach you the old way. Here is my map. And after that, they started searching more effectively. So I keep a copy of mine. I still have it. And any new mentee that comes aboard with me gets a copy of that map with all the areas.
Awesome. Well, that there was no rhyme or reason to how those numbers went, except unless you knew how the numbers went, because, you know, it kind of started small, and then as new areas started growing, they'd say, oh, here's a new Z area, so it would have a new number. And so by the time you got far enough out, you could have area 24, which is Spring Branch.
60.
But you know, the funny thing is, you know,
Go ahead.
the funny thing is the maps aren't really popular anymore, but we can still find the numbers on the MLS associated with each area.
Yep. But
It'll come back.
the map's not available anymore to be able to. It's like they did away with the
Exactly.
PMAP pages. Why not just do away? And what now they've got it broken down into these minuscule areas, these little
Mhm.
geographic areas. So anyway,
Yeah.
wow,
Thank
that's
you.
a blast from the past, Sherry.
You're making me feel old.
No, you're not old. You're not old. You're experienced. That's great. Okay. What else? We got just a couple more things to cover here. So bonuses, of course, kept separate from commissions. F, this, a lot of times we think about this amendment, and the same thing with the amendment to the listing agreement, the 1404, is like, oh, these are new forms. These are not new forms. They've been around forever. It's just that they have to take more things into consideration now. So the amendment to the buyer representation agreement existed before the NAR settlement. And one of the things that used to be there is what you see in F, where the client instructs the broker to cease providing services under this agreement on certain date and to resume providing services on either receipt of further instructions from the client or as of some certain date. So I've got this buyer representation agreement. Buyer's getting ready to go on sabbatical for a month. Rather than terminating it and then come back and creating it later, we can do what we call a withdrawal. That's what this is. This would be withdrawing the buyer representation agreement for now. The agreement itself stays in effect, which is good for us, because if while the buyer is not under where we have ceased providing services, if they go out and decide and they buy something without us, our agreement is still in effect. Whereas if we terminated it and say, hey, when you come back, we'll sign a new one, you're out of the loop. And so this would be a way of, like, we withdraw a listing. This is how we withdraw a buyer. So we would just take them off the market for now. We would just not cease marketing to them, which means we wouldn't be showing them property. We wouldn't be providing services to them until either they come back to us and say, hey, I'm ready to go. Or if we agree on a specific date, we would put that in number 2. The agreement is not terminated and remains in effect for all other purposes, which means my commission is still protected if you go out and buy something and all of that. And then paragraph G, if the change we need to make is not covered in A, B, C, D, E, or F, then we would put it in G. And so that could be a number of different things. It could be, most of the most common ones are the ones that you already see there. If, for instance, the change had to do with intermediary, where before they didn't really understand it, and so they said, yeah, okay, we can go ahead and do that. And then here later on, they decide, no, I've changed my mind. I don't want to do intermediary. Even though they talk about it here, remember, this is only for the 1507. So this does not change intermediary for the 1501. So we would have to do that down here under G. So G would just be any paragraph that's not covered by A, B, C, D, E, or F. So whatever those changes might be.
I got a question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I got a question on that, on the term agreements. If someone's not, I got a client that's coming in out of Chicago, and they said they'll be here and maybe till in June, February. Like, do I sign the agreement from now to February with them? I mean, it's only a 4 month. I take it back as 4 months. So September. So the agreement.
I'm not sure I understand. Are you talking about getting it signed before they get here?
Before they get here, yeah. Before they get here, they might come in and want to take a look at the house, but then they're going back and then come back. They're giving me that 4 months to find them a house, basically.
Yeah.
So
I don't see a problem with that as long as they're willing to commit to it. I don't see a problem with it. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Don, I have a
All
question for you.
Yeah.
So let's say that I have a buyer tenant rep. I'm working with my buyer. We negotiated a deal. We are now pending. The closing date extends past my buyer tenant rep date. What would you recommend to do?
Well, you have protection. You're protected. The end of the agreement, the end of the buyer rep says that as of that date, you need to be under contract to buy.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have to have closed. You're just under contract to buy. As long as you're under contract to buy, you have an automatic extension until you get to the end of that transaction. However, if that transaction falls apart, then you are out. Your agreement is over. So I would go ahead and extend it just because I want to make sure that I still have that buyer. If this deal falls apart, I want to make sure I still have that buyer. The danger to me is if I'm the one who's going to get blamed for that deal not closing, then I'd have to go back and try to get him to sign another buyer rep. I think I might get left out in the cold.
Yep.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It's always one of those things like as you're talking to your buyer and doing your job, you're like, I'm just dotting my I's and crossing my T's. This is one of those things where we want to make sure all our documents are current. This is one that would expire. We're closing in a few weeks, but I want to go ahead and extend this as well.
I would tell the buyer that I'm going to go ahead and make sure and extend this agreement because if for some reason this deal falls apart, that way we can get right back out there and start looking again immediately. We don't have to go and do anything else. We can just go and start looking again.
Yep.
Last little bit, signatures. And this is where we see some mistakes here too. And same thing, and I didn't cover it on the buyer rep, and I should have. Bottom of page 5, because there's a lot of mistakes on the bottom of page 5 and on here too. Because again, it says broker's printed name. And so a lot of times people put Marty's name and his license number. That's not what they want because the transactions they don't belong to Marty, they belong to HomeSmart. Marty is the broker for HomeSmart, but they belong to HomeSmart. So broker's printed name, HomeSmart. License number 544462. Not Marty's license 804082. And not mine either, by the way. Every once in a while, I see mine pop up. That's really not right. And I see that in the sales contract too. So brokers or broker associate signature, that throws people off too because they're used to that term broker associate. And they think, well, I'm a salesperson. I'm not a broker associate, so I can't sign this. Yes, you can. Even as a sales agent, you are still the broker's associate. That's not your title, but you are still the broker's associate. So yes, you can. As a sales agent, yes, you can sign this. And of course, they want your printed name and your license number. So HomeSmart 544462, your signature, check the box that says as broker's associate. Date, obviously the date that you sign it, your printed name, your license number. So, all right. Well, I'm out of document. I don't have anything else to go over. So I know you guys ask questions as we go, but we can open it up for questions and anything else, any comments or anything that anybody else has to share. I love the fact that you shared as we went along. It was great.
You see Elena's comment?
No, I didn't.
We just love Don. Add his license everywhere. No, don't do that. Yeah.
What was it? What'd she say?
She said, we just love Don. We'll add his license everywhere. I was like,
yeah.
No.
No, don't do that. And, as long as we got everybody, maybe we should just touch on that too. The difference between the IABS and the sales contract page 10, because that gets mixed up a lot too, because they use titles that are so similar. So, of course, in the IABS, for the majority of us, not everybody, but for the majority of us, HomeSmart's line number 1, that never changes. Line number 2 never changes. It's always Marty. Line number 3 is the one that changes sometimes. It's either usually going to be me, or if you're a team member, it's your team leader, or if you're a mentee, it's your mentor. So line 3 can change a little bit. And then line 4, of course, is you. But on page 10 of the sales contract, they ask for the licensed supervisor. And sometimes people are putting me. That's not me. As far as that contract is concerned, Marty is the licensed supervisor. It's all on him. Every bit of it.
all the liability. Exactly right.
So on that licensed supervisor, it should always be Marty's name and Marty's license number. And I know it's so easy to do because that looks so close to the delegated supervisor that you see on line 3 of the IABS. It's just, oh, that must be who it is. So follow line 2 from the IABS onto page 10 of the sales contract.
And again, we're not attorneys, but obviously licensed. Who's the license over the brokerage, right? You think about that way, right? Licensed supervisor, me. And then who did I delegate? You, right? So maybe that's who knows how we can explain it, but yeah, it's
It is
Okay.
They probably should have come up with some better termination, because that language in 10 has been there longer than IABS changed like it is. So, all right, Aaron, I think you had something, and then Elena, and then Catherine.
Yeah, you said on the IABS, you say on the licensed supervisor goes you on that one, on the third one, and Marty's on the designated broker firm. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. And then on the contract, you said
on the track contract, it's Marty. My name should not show up anywhere on the sales contract. My name should not show up anywhere on the sales contract.
Okay.
I love that explanation because I've been confused sometimes because I'm typing too fast. It's any way that you can probably have like a cheating, that page already filled up on our document.
That is such a good idea. One time I did all the different types of transactions where if we're intermediary, everybody goes on this side. Maybe we should go back and do that again. I love that idea, Elena. I think I'll do that.
Yeah, I was just going to bring out is the downloadable IABS from the our Real Smart will not allow you to go change if you've got a team lead. Your name's locked in there, Don. Just FYI. Of course,
we need to do some new. I guess we need to do new ones with each possibility and put in RSA, right?
Yeah, exactly.
RSA, yeah.
And the Trek one is going to show your name too, by the way.
Which one?
When you link back to the IABS from Trek.
From on your website or on
Yeah,
HAI
I think so. I think so. I'll go back and double check that, but I'll send you a message.
Are you talking about on HAR?
HAR.
Yeah, that is so ridiculous. I had that problem at the last company that I was at because line 3 changed depending on your geographic location, and HAR says, yeah, so we're doing 1 and that's it, and that's what you get.
Yeah.
The stuff and download. Yeah, the stuff and downloads for RSA though are PDF documents. They're examples or templates, not to be filled out. You should go to your transaction desk.loop or zip forms and fill out your own, or HAR for that matter, to modify. But that's an example to show you how it should look like with Don's information and my information on there. And then Michael, there's a sample purchase agreement in there. And they believe a sample listing agreement. We're working on other sample documents in Real Smart Agent download. So,
and there's also a checklist if you go a little further that'll show you all the forms that are required for each type of transaction too, that newer agents need to be aware of.
I just sent that out twice this morning already. Yeah.
I tuned right in, Don.
I think any other questions? Anything else? Anybody else want to add into the conversation here? Are we good?
Oh, I have a question that Nelly actually texted me. When you were talking about the buyer's rep, you use kind of the marketing, what was it? A marketing kind of phrase. If I don't work for my money, what I'm going to do for you or something like that. Can you repeat that? Because we need to type that up.
I'm not sure which one we're talking
Talk
about.
about when you're negotiating. Why would I cut my commission, right?
Yeah.
When we're advocating for your clients, right? If I give up my commission so quickly, what will I do with your money?
So yeah. So if I feel like if it's so easy for me to give up my own money, how can you feel safe that I'm going to try to protect yours?
Oh, I like that. Okay, let me type that up.
Looks like I had a hand somewhere. I saw. Oh well. Nope.
Maybe it went up and came down.
Yeah, it looks like it went up, went down. So
okay,
I'm gonna stop recording then. Let's see.
All right.